Hello, my name is Yaya. Thank you for tuning into Trauma and God. I know from personal experience that healing from the black cloud of trauma is possible, but it does take time. Just as in nature, there's always sunlight behind a dark cloud. So it is for us. God is always there. We just have to find Him. In this series, I talk about things that hinder us from finding the light and things we can do that help us overcome obstacles. Today's subject is liar, liar. In this vlog, I'll talk about the deviousness and destructiveness of narcissistic behavior. In my 13th vlog called Growing Up with a Narcissist, I spoke in detail of what it was like to live with a narcissist. Today, I want to lay again a quick foundation by defining narcissism because it is the context of this vlog. The word narcissist is today used as a synonym for the word selfish, describing someone showing selfish behavior. Well, this can be true for all of us. So we're all selfish at times. This is not the psychological definition of narcissism. Here's a helpful definition from helpguide.org. NPD, or narcissistic personality disorder, describes people in love with an idealized, grandiose image of themselves. They're in love with this inflated self-image precisely because it allows them to avoid deep feelings of insecurity. But propping up their illusions of grandeur takes a lot of work, and that's where the dysfunctional attitudes and behaviors come in. Narcissistic personality disorder involves a pattern of self-centered, arrogant thinking and behavior, a lack of empathy and consideration of others, in an excessive need for admiration. Others often describe people with NPD as cocky, manipulative, selfish, patronizing, and demanding. This way of thinking surfaces in every area of the narcissist's life, from work and friendships to family and love relationships. People with narcissistic personality disorder are extremely resistant to changing their behavior, even when it's causing them problems. Their tendency is to turn the blame on others. What's more, they are extremely sensitive to and react badly to even the slightest criticism, disagreement, or perceived slights, which they view as personal attacks. For people in the narcissist's life, it's often easier to go along with their demands to avoid coldness and rages. However, by understanding more about narcissistic personality disorder, you can spot the narcissist in your life, protect yourself from their power plays, and establish healthy boundaries. Well, my sister and I are close in age. From an early moment, my mother saw my sister as quiet, good, and could do no wrong. I was called loud, bad, a liar, and I could do no right. I became mother's scapegoat. I was the person who was blamed for all the wrongdoings, mistakes, and faults of others. There's a menacing nuance to the term scapegoat, because scapegoating is often done in situations where something is said or done that's helpful or useful to the individual employing it, but it's neither honest nor truthful. Mother painted me as a liar, yet it was Mother who made the truth out to be lies, and lies were her truth. She made black white and white black. Mother twisted the truth to suit herself. In fact, it was my mother who was the liar, not me. Well, as the scapegoat, I was the bad child responsible for everything that went wrong in my family. In turn, I felt lost and ignored. My siblings, the good children, seemed to get attention, praise, and gifts. The fact that a scapegoat exists tells you how toxic a narcissistic family is. The scapegoat is usually the one who dares to speak out and challenge the poison in the family. The scapegoat child poses a threat to the system that serves the rest really well. Even a good child will fear the scapegoat because they will ruin what is working well for them. Well, not until later in my married life did I see that because I am clever, attractive, empathetic, and have a passionate need to tell the truth, I embodied all the elements mother felt were a threat to her. I don't know if she was jealous or envious, but it was definitely something along those lines. As I mentioned before, my narcissistic mother was black and white. There were no grays in her. When she made a decision about anything or someone, it never changed. And she applied this decision across the board. She called me the liar in every area of my life. While mother often lost her temper with me, she frequently argued with me. And she would deliberately do things to annoy me. She blamed me for her mistakes and for things that happened to her years before I was even born. Well, as a child, I didn't see any of this. I just felt her constant ire and was extremely confused by it because I was trying so hard to be good. I wanted my mother to love me, and I wished she could share herself with me because I felt her hurt and pain. I kept being open with her in an attempt to show her how to be open and caring about me. Well, my attempts always backfired. Mother would take my words and twist them. When I rose up and argued and said that's not what I said, she would say, you guessed it, you're a liar. My teenage years came, and if I thought it was bad before, life now became far worse. There were times when it was far easier to tell a lie because I got into far less trouble for doing that. Of course, the irony is that when I did tell a lie, mother never caught me. She didn't know. I'd learned to doubt myself and question all my motives. None of my friends talked about having experienced this particular home dynamic, which made me feel very odd, isolated, and alone. Initially, even my boyfriend, later my husband, found it hard to believe what I was saying. That is until mother lumped him in with me, and we both became liars and bad people. Then he understood. Well, recovery from being the family scapegoat has been emotionally hard work. Here are some things I have learned along the way. 1, I started talking about myself and my upbringing. It's good to talk about hurts. My new husband understood me when I started to talk about mother's narcissistic behavior towards me because, evidently, he experienced it too. Initially, we treated it as a quirk of my family and didn't understand the devastating emotional effects on me. We would reason that every family has its quirks, right? I have to admit that I felt disloyalty initially to my family when talking about my mother, and I only talked to one or two outsiders. I learned that friends found it hard to believe me because Mother would present herself to them as gracious and kind and act in the opposite way to the one I was describing. My friends felt sure that I was misreading her and the problem lay with me, which didn't help. It made me feel much, much worse. So I learned the hard way that sometimes talking about Mother was best done with a professional whose training helped them to be sympathetic to my plight. It was later on that I did have a friend who listened to me and told me that she believed what I was saying. Well, the second thing I learned was how much God loves me and how He made me. Mother wouldn't let me be myself, nor help me find out who I was. I thought that if anyone really knew me, it had to be God because He created me after all. So He knows my strengths and weaknesses, and He would have all the answers to my questions. I strengthened my relationship with God and set about trying to understand Him and love Him more. I studied the Bible. I took copious notes of the pastor's Sunday morning sermon. I was desperate to change. In addition, I studied subjects I love. I took personality tests. In other words, I did whatever I could to find out who I was. In my vlogs, you will note how hard it has been to believe the truth when you've been told lies in childhood. By doing healthy things like these, eventually I found that the truth dissolved the lies. The third thing I found I had to learn was what a healthy marriage looks like. Our early days of marriage were fraught. My harmful behavior was a product of my narcissistic upbringing. I knew how to defend myself. I was always on high alert, and I was very quick to point out all my husband's deficits. I thought this was how marriage worked, when what I was actually doing was scapegoating my husband and pushing and throwing all my angst onto him. I had to change. I was wrong. I had to learn what healthy emotions look like and learn how to curb my unhealthy emotions. In my second vlog, called Emotions, I talk in more detail about how I found out what healthy emotions look like. So the fourth thing I learned was what healthy family relationships look like. I wanted to love my children for who they were and for them to feel loved and wanted by us. I didn't want to repeat any of my family dynamics with my own children. Therefore, I had a very steep learning curve. I read copious books on raising children. I went to seminars. I observed how others dealt with their children. I did everything I could to learn about a loving, healthy way to raise children. Well, I'm not saying I did it perfectly. Far from it. I made mistakes, but I really tried. The fifth thing I learned was that my siblings will always see me as the scapegoat. Well, as my understanding clarified, I saw my mother's dynamics towards me, but my siblings did not experience those same dynamics growing up. They had mother's attention and care. They still disagree with my recollections of my childhood, saying things like, I misrepresent my mother, In other words, they see me in the old light that I'm a liar and everything is my fault. So the sixth thing I learned was that I have to create healthy boundaries for myself and distance myself from my family. Mother had a way of catching me when I was alone. When I told the others the mean things Mother had just said to me, she would lie and shame me by saying she hadn't said that. Again, I was a liar, and my siblings were told not to listen to me because, after all, I was being very bad. Creating healthy boundaries and distancing myself from my family was hard to do because it felt wrong. I felt that as a Christian, God would help me through it if I persevered in telling the truth. God would somehow change my family, and they would see and acknowledge our mother's prejudice and injustice. This has not been the case, for they didn't experience it for themselves. I have to accept that they may never understand my perspective and be fine with that. Well, later on, my husband's work naturally distanced me from my family, which I thank God for. In hindsight, that was such a good thing. My siblings didn't hear or witness for themselves how my mother became more and more verbally aggressive towards me and those that I loved. My counselor felt my mother's behavior was escalating towards physical violence and strongly urged me to consider our personal safety. When I broke off all contact with my mother, I felt a mixture of emotions: relieved, a total failure, and very guilty. My siblings saw me as selfish and uncaring. The seventh thing I learned was to let go of my mother. I felt that if I didn't speak up about my hurts, no one would defend and speak up for me. Therefore, I carried all my hurts and memories in the forefront of my mind, rehearsing them repeatedly so that I would never forget what happened. I was totally unaware of this heavy burden that I was carrying. Strengthening my relationship with God and understanding more about the extent of His love for me has been the key to letting go. When I finally couldn't carry my burdens anymore, I came to the point of realizing that God had been with me and had gone through everything with me. He had seen and He would remember everything that had been done. So finally, I found that I was able to give my mother and my burdens to God and feel reassured that He would know what to do with them. This reality set me free from the burden of my mother. The eighth thing I learned was which responsibilities were mine to carry. Growing up, I was led to believe that every bad event in the world was my fault, from earthquakes in China to my family's lack of funds. But I was not responsible for every bad thing that happened to my family. Instead of apologizing for everything, I've had to learn that I don't carry the burden of guilt for everyone. I still struggle with this one. Oh my gosh. I am very quick to apologize for things that have absolutely nothing to do with me and are definitely not my fault. The ninth thing I learned was what healthy friendships look like. I internalized feelings of fear, shame, loss, and worthlessness. It made me vulnerable to rejection abuse and manipulation from others. Although I became familiar with my narcissistic mother dismissive's behavior of me, I was blind to the fact that I was a magnet for other narcissists like my mother. I've had to learn that people who lack empathy are very drawn to me, and not for good, healthy reasons. They see that my empathy for them can be manipulated for their own power plays. I personally got sucked into a friendship with a narcissist, and that's, if you want to find out about that, see Trauma and God, number 14, Choosing a Narcissist. They're usually extremely nice people, and I enjoy spending time with them, and they're usually very quick to tell me that they love me. But I was like a frog in a pot of cold water who had no idea the water was slowly getting hotter and hotter. Well, over time, their true selves came out because deep down they found me a threat. Very gradually, more and more of their angst got projected on me until I finally saw it clearly. I then had to draw boundaries and break off some friendships. I know that because of my personality, I will always remain susceptible to narcissists. That's why I keep learning what I can about narcissistic behavior. I also try to understand more about my own susceptibilities so that I can protect myself from their power plays. Well, the 10th thing I had to learn was to forgive myself. At the time, I couldn't see what now seems so obvious to me. Her narcissistic behavior was never about me. It was all about mother's needs. It made me feel stupid when I repeatedly fell for her lies and ended up believing myself to be at fault in some way. Gosh, I was such an idiot. I had to learn to forgive myself. Understanding and undoing the effects of childhood family dynamics in us is the process. It takes a long time to change unhealthy dynamics for healthy ones. But you start the process the same way you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. In his love for us, God graciously does precisely that. He shows us one thing at a time that we need to deal with. And he only shows us that one thing when he knows we can emotionally handle the issue. God doesn't waste his words. He never tells lies. He treats us honestly and gently because he loves us so very much. I'm not guilty of failing to understand how my mother emotionally ensnared me when I was a little girl. I'm not a liar. I now know that God loves me very much, and God loves you very much, in every bit as much as he loves me. There's no difference between us. Please subscribe and tell others if you found this vlog helpful. You may email me, Yaya, at traumaandgod@gmail.com, or read my personal story, Snakes in the Loo, at Amazon Books. If this does things in you, please reach out and talk to a mental health professional. In the US, help is also available at the following: Suicide and Crisis Helpline, 1-800-273-8255, or the Rape, Abuse and Incest National Network Helpline at 1-800-656-4673. God is for you, and so am I. Join me next week And I'll be back up next Thursday when I'll be back at 10. Thanks for listening.